And now our Catholic in America exclusive segment. President Trump spent last month trying to make immigration the top midterm issue. And when it came to media coverage involving Catholics, he has largely succeeded. Based on News Nightly's exclusive analysis of Catholics online, in print, and broadcast, immigration, just behind clergy sex abuse, was the top issue. As Catholics go to the polls, here's what the faithful are reading and seeing across the country.
President Trump has claimed without evidence that the group of an estimated 7,000 migrants poses a national security threat.
Most of the print, TV, online stories focused on Catholic groups stepping in to help migrants trying to enter the country. From the Arizona Republic, the numbers of families released into southern Arizona were so large that Catholic Community Services opened an emergency shelter in Tucson to house them. And at usnews.com, Catholic Community Services of Southern Arizona, coordinating closely with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, recently placed 340 people in motels in Yuma and Tucson. Clergy sex abuse was the other major story in October of concern to Catholics, spiking on October 12th with the acceptance by Pope Francis of Cardinal Donald Wuerl's resignation. The Wall Street Journal wrote, dissatisfaction about how the church hierarchy has responded to priests who sexually abuse children has pushed some Catholics away from the institution. The resignation of Cardinal Wuerl and the church's response has been too little, too late. CBS News 60 Minutes spent 14 minutes on the handling of clergy abuse complaints in Buffalo, New York, including an interview with Siobhan O'Connor, the former executive assistant to Bishop Richard Malone. She explained why she secretly copied and leaked internal emails to reporters.
The reality of what I saw really left me with no other option, because at the end of my life, I'm not going to answer to Bishop Malone. I'm going to answer to God.
Religious freedom, the environment, and the death penalty were least covered stories from the Catholic perspective. Joining me for more analysis is Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. Robert, great to have you back on the program.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
We've been tracking media coverage of Catholics since June. Overall, the tone of reporting about issues associated with Catholics has turned more neutral in October. Why do you think that is?
Well, my mother always told me that when I didn't know the answer to the question, I should say I don't know. And here I don't know.
Well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that sex abuse hasn't been in the news as much, and everything's been focused on immigration. How do you think President Trump's focus on immigration leading up to the midterms will affect Catholic voters?
Well, I would imagine it would be a mix, and that's because Catholics in general and the church itself is very pro-immigrant. We regard the nation's success as in part the function of being a place that is very accepting of immigrants. We're a nation of immigrants. That's more than just a cliche. That's a truth. And the church has always had a special solicitude for people who are fleeing terrible situations. At the same time, while the church and most Catholics are pro-immigrant and certainly want people who come to this country, including those who are here unlawfully, to be treated in a humane manner, Catholics also believe in the rule of law. They believe that the procedures for vetting refugees and deciding who has refugee status are fair procedures and need to be observed. Yes, we should be taking refugees. We should be generous in taking refugees. But we also need to enforce a coherent and sensible refugee system. People need to come seeking refugee status in the right way and go through the system in a proper manner. So I think Catholics are generally pro-immigrant, and they're certainly willing to give refugee status to people who need it, but they want the rules to be followed, and they want the rule of law to be observed.
In Arizona, the Democratic candidate is the first candidate to openly reject a religious label, and as Catholics look to elect leaders, how important do you think religious affiliation is to the faithful?
You know, our Constitution says that there should be no religious test for public office, for offices under the United States of America. And that's a good rule, and it's a rule that we have long subscribed to in the United States. I want the best person for office. I don't care if that person is Catholic or Protestant or Jewish, or even if the person is an unbeliever. I want the best person. But I do want a person who stands for moral rectitude, someone who stands for decency, who respects human rights, including the rights of the child in the womb, who will stand up for religious liberty, who will stand against the culture of death. That's the kind of candidate that I want, and I'm going to choose that candidate from among anyone, the entire pool of people who present themselves. So I don't think it is a deal breaker for most Americans. It certainly isn't for me that this woman is not religiously affiliated or rejects a religious label. I'm more interested in where she stands on the issues. Now, in the case of the particular woman that you're mentioning, from my point of view, and I think from the point of view of most Catholics and other believers, she is not a person we're going to
vote for, right?
Like.
Many
her
Catholics
views are very far to the left on moral and cultural issues.
Many Catholics have told us, to your point, that they are one-issue voters, and how a candidate votes on life issues stands above everything else. So, Robbie, how does prudential judgment play into that argument when it comes to voting?
Well, prudential judgment is important. There are certain absolute norms of morality, including the sanctity of all human life, the sanctity of human life in all stages and conditions, whether we're talking about the child in the womb, the cognitively disabled person or physically disabled person, whether we're talking about the frail elderly person approaching the end of life. All human life is sacred. But of course, not all politicians have perfect records on life and on other important issues. And therefore, we have to make judgment calls, and we have to make decisions between less than perfect candidates who present themselves for office. Now, I wish that all candidates had consistent life records. All of them were solidly and strongly and comprehensively pro-life and pro-religious liberty. But that's not what we have. We certainly don't have that in most of our candidates for public office. So we have to make prudential judgments. But we have to prioritize the most important issues, and we have to prioritize the issues in which human rights are most at stake. And there is no issue that can be given priority, in my judgment, over the issue of protecting the life of the innocent child in the womb.
President Trump has positioned himself as the most pro-life president we've seen since this is being billed as a referendum on the presidency. And if Democrats win big, what does that say about the importance of the issue to the electorate?
Well, President Trump is a complicated person. Even those who support him, and even those who support him strongly, recognize that he has some pretty serious faults. But he's a highly transactional person. He has made good on his promise to the pro-life electorate or segment of the electorate to nominate judges who are opposed to Roe versus Wade, who are true constitutionalists, who will stand up for the right under the Constitution of the American people if they choose, which we hope they will, to protect the life of the child in the womb, realizing that in order to get there, we need to get rid of Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood against Casey, the cases that are standing in our way. So if the Republicans suffer a big defeat, and if that's because of their association with Donald Trump, I don't think that that should be read to mean that the American people reject the pro-life message. There are lots of things about President Trump that, apart from his being willing to uphold the pro-life position, there are lots of things that people object to. His rhetoric, some of his policies when it comes to immigration, family separation, those kinds of things. So we're talking about a flawed president. All human beings are flawed. This president certainly has his flaws. Some of those flaws give Catholics as well as other people a lot of room for concern, and yet he has a strong record on some important aspects of pro-life issues, and we're just going to have to see how this comes out as far as voters are concerned. But if the president and his party suffer a big defeat tonight, I would not assume or infer from that that means the American people are against the pro-life message. It means they're against Donald Trump, and there are lots of reasons, quite apart from the pro-life position, why people would be opposed to the president.
Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University, thank you as always for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.